This whole half of the class is getting coffee or in the hallway. I just saw them. They'll be here very soon. As they're coming, there's been more religion in the national news in the last couple of weeks than I remember for a long time. Particularly theology is more prevalent, or at least noticed. If any of you are interested in discussing what J.D. Vance talked about, I would be very interested. I spent some time studying it. I remember Ordo Amoris, that's the phrase. I hadn't looked at that in 30 years. And I just called up a good friend of mine who's a Catholic theologian and said, is this? He said, no, it's not a big deal. It's a thing, but it's not like the main thing. So we can talk about what that is, where it comes from, Catholic social teaching, which is to a great degree at odds. They're not inconsistent, but they're not at the same level, if that makes sense to you. So later, if you're going to bring that up, we're happy to do that. Maybe if I don't go off on too many tangents, we could go through 2 chapters today. The first chapter of Ecclesiastes we had to spend a lot of time on. Second was also quite substantial. Third was the famous poem. There's this little bit of not a lull, but he's a little repetitive. Kohelet, the author, the preacher, the teacher. And so we might be able to go through 2 chapters. We'll go as far as we need. If there's any time you have questions or want to talk about some national thing or some personal thing, please feel free to raise your hand and ask. Chapter 4, Book of Ecclesiastes. Again, notice a few phrases that stand out. I only got one word. Again, this is another observation by Kohelet. Anytime you hear under the sun, what does that phrase mean? Everything on earth that exists for people. Anything under heaven is a bit broader category, like through eternity. Work or toil means not a good, honest day's work, or I put in my 8 hours and I get this much money. It doesn't mean that. It means drudgery. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but that's what you're stuck with in life, my life's lot. So it's not just good work, it's exhausting drudgery. Those ideas keep repeating. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are practiced under the sun. Look, the tears of the oppressed with no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power with no one to comfort them. This fits, by the way, extremely well with how one might interpret the world and cultural, political things today. Yes, sir. I didn't quite catch it. The tears of the oppressed, and there are also tears of the oppressors. No one to comfort the oppressors. That's a good observation, because in fact, there's no comfort for anybody. That's part of the point. And in no way is he saying it's good to be an oppressor or good to be oppressed. That's just simply the way he observes the world to be. And there is no comfort for any of them. Except the good thing is oppressors have power. That's what makes you an oppressor. So, that's good. You got that going for you at least. And I thought this is, I'm not even sure how to describe it. I'll just read it. Fatalistic, a little on the dark side. And I thought the dead who have already died more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who has not yet been born and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Then I saw that all the toil, the word for that in Hebrew is amal, work, drudgery. I saw all the toil and all skill and work come from one person's envy of another. This also is vanity, haval, and chasing after wind. Fools fold their hands and consume their own flesh. Better is a handful with quiet than 2 handfuls with toil and the chasing after the wind. Again, another example. I saw vanity under the sun, the case of solitary individuals without sons or brothers, yet there is no end to all their toil, and their eyes are never satisfied with riches. For whom am I toiling, they ask, and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up the other. But woe to the one who is alone and falls, and does not have another to help. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? And though one might prevail against another, two will stand one. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king, who will no longer take advice. One can indeed come out of prison to reign, even though born poor in the kingdom. I saw all the living who, moving under the sun, follow that youth who replaced the king. There was no end to all those people whom he led, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and chasing after the wind. So this is again, here are more examples of how futile, meaningless, haval, vapor life is. So this is not, if you need to go to your happy place, don't think about Ecclesiastes, is a fair thing. And this is an internal, if you will, dialogue or monologue on justice or injustice and death. And the unifying phrase of this is, I saw. So this is he's a witness to this. He's observed these things which he's claiming are in fact universal. Is what he's saying, would that exist in today's postmodern society or tribal society or middle-aged ones? I think it works pretty well for all of those. Can oppressed people find help anywhere? Maybe. Who are the oppressed according to Kohelet? Those without power in any culture. And here's the real kicker. Do we have any power over death? Oh, no, we don't. So we are oppressed in that way. That, by the way, is part of the Christian message. Do we have any power over sin, according to the New Testament, particularly Paul? No. Oh, gosh. Do we have any power over all this thing? Well, it's all vanity. In fact, no, there's an oppression of people who are beaten down by society and the system. But then on another level, kind of macro level, everyone is oppressed by sin and death. That, by the way, is part of Paul's main message. And that one needs God to counter that, to cover that, and does that through Jesus. But that's not what the writer is saying. He's more, everybody's oppressed, it's awful, get used to it. Am I wrong? No. Verses 2 and 3 are about death. And he divides people into three orders or categories of happiness. And who is the most happy in his understanding, his system? Those who have never been born, because you didn't have to experience the horrible lot of life. That's the best category. And then those who are dead are next best, because at least their suffering is over. And those living, it's like, geez, this is like, I kept hearing I was at a store yesterday and I heard the Smiths. If you're my age, they're an 80s band where everything was depressing. Everything is in a minor key. It's like, well, right now in Pittsburgh, it's 32 degrees and it's gray every day and it feels like it will never get sunny or warm again for more than like a day or two. And it's just this way forever. And that's life. So, better off if you're dead, but even better if you were never born to experience all that. Non-existence is preferred to existence. And note that he does not advocate suicide here. That has nothing to do with this. It's simply making a hyperbolic statement. The expression, the extreme is how awful it is that we experience this. Everybody is oppressed. That's verses 1 through 3. Verse 4, then I saw all the toil of Maul and all the skill come from one person's envy of another. So will any of you watch the Super Bowl tonight? I watch the 10-minute highlights of games. I like that. So the Super Bowl this year, some videos I've seen are going back to commercial styles like young, sexy women in bikinis that we haven't seen much in 8 to 10 years. That's not debuting, but reappearing again. And oddly, there's a shift in culture going on. And so what are they using in all these, how much is it for a 30-second ad? Millions of dollars? That's, by the way, Hardee's or Carl's Jr. has this that's one of their things. And they'll be like, it shows a girl, I've seen it, a girl eating a hamburger with tons of stuff on it and like a big American flag pickup truck and planes flying over and an aircraft carrier. And it's like as American as you can get. Is just ridiculous. But what sells most ads? So sex in America is one. What sells most ads or products or services? What's that? Did you say beer? Beer? No. Maybe beer. Humor works. That's what my God, I don't know how Progressive Insurance and those other ones ever make a penny. Because that Limu, Emu, and Doug are Progressive Insurance, but Liberty and Progressive are constant. I tune them out, but my gosh, what type of service or quality can they get if they're constantly barraging you? It's humor that they use. A lot of it's envy. That's the point. Don't you want to look like this or feel like this or be young, or here's this sexy young model and you could look like this too if you buy our car or wear our thing or whatever. It's the fundamental operating principle of advertising, at least to get people to buy stuff. It's I want to look like this or feel or be like this. And all of those will spend millions and gazillions of dollars today to convince you in the breaks of the Kansas City Chiefs, Philadelphia Eagles game to buy this stuff. And Kohelet is saying, in fact, envy is the driver of many, many problems. Would you disagree with that? I think he's probably onto something really smart, wise right there. From one person's envy of another. This also, envy, is vanity of all, havel havalim, vanity of vanities, or chasing after the wind. The context here is competition to work better or do better, which he's saying is essentially this is an absurd way to make a living. Isn't that the American way, though? He'll get into it a little bit later about competition and the American concept of you got to work yourself to death to be more productive, more efficient, generate more revenue for somebody else. All these things are interwoven throughout what he's saying. It's all there. Envy in Hebrew is kana, and this I didn't know. I find this fascinating. Kana'ah, envy, means literally to be intensely red, like your face is red. A surge of blood, your blood is boiling. What do we say, what color with envy in English? Green. Where in the world do we get that from? I didn't know. I had to look it up. Probably Shakespeare's Othello. In that time, green was associated with that emotion. And he called jealousy a green-eyed monster. So probably that's where it comes from. So red, boiling, red-faced. What's that?
Green is also the color of money.
Green is also the color of money. But in Hebrew, a much older culture, your face is red with envy. Your blood is boiling. I want to be like that guy. I want to be like her. Verse 5 and 6, these are very weird. It's a idiomatic expression translated into English, and it never really works. I know in Russian, Bog troits lubid, God loves Trinity. How would we translate that in English instead of literally Bog troits lubid? Things come in threes. That's what it means. But if you translate it literally, God loves Trinity, it doesn't make any sense. So some of these two are like that. This is a literal translation from Hebrew to English of a traditional saying. We might say something like, a fool won't work and therefore a fool won't eat. If you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't work, you don't eat, you destroy yourself. That's a pretty rough idea. Anybody raise their hand? Verse 6, better is a handful, a modest amount with quiet. Give me a little bit with no trouble than a lot with lots of trouble. That's probably what that expression means. Toil, and 2 handfuls with toil. Toil in Ecclesiastes, as I said, means work, trouble, sorrow, weariness, drudgery, even oppression. It means making money for someone else when you're doing all the digging, all the computing, all the time, but the other guy somewhere that doesn't live here most likely is making it all. I think it would work very well thinking of picking cotton for a master, thinking of digging coal for somebody else, and this is where I come from. Merle Travis, I don't use song lyrics very often. Merle Travis is from the same place I'm originally from, which Muhlenberg County produced more coal the year I was born than anywhere in the world before or since in that year. Do you know the song? You load 16 tons of coal, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. That's toil. That's them all. I work, I'm another day older and deeper in debt. That's what life is. Like, yeah, I think the bluegrass song, country song, as well as Ecclesiastes absolutely agree there. That word in Hebrew, amal, occurs 57 times in the Old Testament, the Bible. 22 of those are in this book of Ecclesiastes. There are only 12 chapters, so this is like twice a chapter. This is a constant refrain in the book. Do you remember where the whole idea of toil, work as drudgery, our lot in life, when does that first appear in the Bible? Genesis. Everybody, God created the heavens and the earth, it's all good. We're like hanging out with the lions and the bears, everything's great. Then what happens? Adam and Eve have the apple, and then what happens? You're out of the garden. In fact, with toil you shall live. By the sweat of your brow, life is going to be hard from now on. Women have trouble in childbirth. There'll be enmity between you and the snake, evil, and everything's going to be more difficult. That's when Amal first makes its appearance. So when we turn from God, this becomes the way of the world. So that's an interesting echo of that Genesis story there. Do you toil to climb the ladder or make a name for yourself? Build your career? I did. There's a point in life, probably for most people, where like, I'm good, I've done that. But if you don't do it, then you never know what it's like and don't have that experience. And I think Kohelet, if you remember, tells a story. If you think you're awesome, I was more awesome. I was richer, I had more women, I had more stuff, I had more houses than all of you, and here's what I experienced. So he's now looking back on this and telling the story that none of this really matters. So, where are we on verse 7 there? Again means yet another example of vanity under the sun. What in the world does it mean here in verse 8? The case of solitary individuals without sons or brothers. What could he mean by all that? If you only have yourself to look after, you don't have a spouse or kids, that type of thing. It's a little bit different. You can still, he's saying, now it kind of makes sense. If you have a kid to care for, you got to work. That's completely understandable. You have a spouse to care for, I get it. But even people who are single with no other responsibility, even they get sucked into this world. So it's the extreme example to prove the point. There may be a valid reason to toil work if others are your responsibility, but those who don't have the responsibility do the same thing. Everybody falls into the same trap. They work, and there's never enough. For whom am I working, he might say, and all this is chasing after the wind. All of this is vapor. So there's the single person, and then what does he immediately turn to? A couple, a partnership. If you think the single people were bad, just wait till we get to the couples. It's just the same. But two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. Why are two better than one? Because one of you can take out the trash, and the other one can do the taxes, and one can cook, and one can wash the dishes. That's his basic argument. You share the load of garbage you're carrying through life. It's at least half as bad, or not half as bad, because you're sharing this load. Again, it's not extremely uplifting, but at least there is some truth to that and some wisdom to that. Any partnered, married people here, you don't have to clean the whole house yourself. That's his point. I mean, if you have to do everything yourself all the time, it could get old, he's saying. And if there's somebody else there, it makes it a little bit better. The prayer book, by the way, says it this way. This is on page 423. The union of husband and wife in heart, body, and mind is intended by God for their mutual joy, for the help and comfort given one another in prosperity and adversity, and when it is God's will, for the procreation of children and their nurture and knowledge and love of the Lord. That's what it's for companionship, for mutual joy, for sharing life's toil. It says that right there in the prayer book service. And by the way, when the couple take vows, for rich or for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, everybody focuses on the good one. Not the sickness part. No, that when everything's great and we're rich, not when we're super poor, most likely starting out, but that's sharing all those things together. A threefold cord opposed to a single strand is not easily broken. Do you know the American, and this may or may not have with the American seal, the Great Seal of the United States? What's the seal of the United States on back of a dollar bill? It's an eagle holding in its right talon, the main one, an olive branch. We're all about peace. In its left talon is 13 arrows, representing the 13 colonies, and it probably comes from this same idea. In the dollar bill, if anybody have a dollar bill, you can look on the back. The arrows are spread out, but they're held together, and supposedly the chief, the great Iroquois chief, brought 5 tribes or nations together and said, look, I can take one arrow and break it very easily, but 5 nations together, 5 arrows are not easily broken. And so we are unified, stronger together. So the left hand, which represents talon, we're ready to fight war to defend ourselves if necessary, is the offhand, and we'll do it, but we're mainly about peace. Similar idea, threefold cord is not easily broken. You put a community together, it's much stronger than an individual. So he suggests that without saying all that. Is anybody disagreeing with? Remember, this is not, some person got mad at me. I can't believe you said that. I'm not agreeing everything with Kohelet, but simply what he's presenting. Steve?
Perhaps not apropos, but regarding the national symbol of the eagle. Originally, the arrows were in the right hand and the olive branch.
That is true.
Left hand.
So they were reversed.
I think it was after the War of 1812. They said, do we really want to look like that?
Yep. Verses 13 through 16. Better is a poor, this is reversed from what you would expect. Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who will no longer take advice. Does age guarantee wisdom? No. Big fat no on that one. It can come. It's very hard to be wise when you're young, you just don't have enough experience. But age, as we learn, does not guarantee wisdom at all. There are lots of things we could cite to show that. So better to be a wise youth who's poor. Is it better in Kohelet's mind to be rich or poor? What has he said so far? Chasing after wealth is vanity, absolutely true. But it's probably better to have money than not have money, because money doesn't guarantee happiness, it's not objectively good, but it can insulate you from some things. I think that would be his basic thing. It allows you to have, which you'll get to in a little bit, you can eat a good meal, or it gives you health insurance, or it gives you air conditioning, or some security that not having money, like, for example, is this true? The number one cause of bankruptcy in the U.S. is health care issue. So if you have a health care thing and you don't have money, you're suddenly bankrupt. And does that person, are they good or bad morally? It has nothing to do with that, but they're bankrupt now. Having money makes those things easier. That, I think, also is basically what Kohelet is saying there.
Maybe you addressed this in another class, and I missed it, but I don't know what we assume about the writer of this stuff, but the person has the leisure to write this, right? And they're literate, so they're not a manual laborer.
That is absolutely true.
I just have them on this music stand laid out and looking at the beginning and the ending of the 4 and 5. It seems like the author sees injustice, but let's not dwell with that too much. Let's get off that quickly and move into, there's a lot of bad stuff going down, so let's move on.
That's fair. So the author, as I said earlier, is the narrator and the main character, the protagonist, are different people. But Kohelet, the speaker, the teacher, the preacher, who's writing all this, again, made the case that he's rich and has experienced all these things. So I'm the supreme example of everything that one could have. I've experienced that. So he's making the case with this evidence for that. He does talk about injustice, but doesn't dwell on it in a way that our culture would, or I should say focus on it in a way that our culture would. He's more being descriptive and then finding one thing after another that it is just havel havalim, vapor of vapors, vanity of vanities. That's absolutely true. So if you look for a contemporary understanding of justice, that you will not find that. A contemporary understanding of justice is not, we talked about this last week, is not exactly what the Bible talks about. So you have to remember we're starting out in Hebrew, and we're translating it to English, and then we have this other concepts of justice from a Hebrew mind and an American postmodern mind, and those things may mesh or maybe not. It feels to me, if we try to make justice from the Bible mesh with justice from America, it's like you're shifting a car and you keep missing, the clutch is not right, and you're trying to find the gear. That's where we are. But they're there if we just understand the slight differences. Where we go? Do you want to say more about that or ask more? So with that wise youth, even the limited success of wise youth will not endure. Why? Beauty fades. Basically, the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. Everything falls apart. Hooray, then you die. There's Kohelet. It's all a chasing after the wind, constantly, forever and ever. And then he ends. That's that whole chapter. And remember, chapters and verses were a later addition. They wouldn't have in all the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, they weren't written in together. It's simply a device that scholars, in this case rabbinic scholars, let's put the divisions here, because then we can all know area what line we're referring to. So actually, part of the first seven verses of chapter 5 are really more connected to chapter 4, what we just talked about. But there is this, it's like we call, each of us has a name. It's an arbitrary thing in one degree, but we all agree this is Nick, that's Karen, and I'm Jonathan, and so on. So verse 1 of chapter 5, Shoda. Well, in verse 14, one can indeed come out of prison to reign, even though born poor in the kingdom. I didn't hear your question. Is he talking about Joseph, who was in prison in Egypt? It's not for sure, but very likely. Because you would not expect somebody to be a prisoner or a felon. Just let me pick a random example. Would you expect somebody to be a felon to be the President of the United States? Or a war criminal? Or, I don't know, a philanderer on his fifth wife? Or somebody who had been bankrupt? Or somebody who had got caught doing whatever? In one degree, I mean, that's a fanciful example I just gave. But in one level, absolutely not. But another way, yeah, because that's who gets power in not just America, but the world. That's exactly who you would expect in one way, but not at all in another way. And there is a thought in all throughout the Bible, and it's not a seamless thing, but it's absolutely there. And you'll notice this with Jesus in the New Testament, obviously New Testament, healing stories. So who sinned, this man or his parents? He was born blind. It's got to be somebody's fault, because otherwise, if you're poor, wasn't the moral equivalency of having a physical or mental malady? But do the poor deserve to be poor? I mean, yes or no, depending on who you ask and when you ask. We would say, I'm guessing most people in this room, no, that's simply life circumstances. But if you're born with some type of illness or malady, a deformation, you must have deserved that, is a thought common in the Middle East at the time, not specifically said in the Bible, you did this, so therefore you are cursed in this way. That's not biblical, but it was more of like a folk understanding of things. And so Jesus in the New Testament is trying to help people understand that's not how it works. You didn't do a bad thing, or your parents didn't. We don't have karma. You didn't do this and then you're punished with this. You're just, some people are because of a chromosome, or they were out in the sun too long, or something causes cancer. Germs cause disease, not somebody's action of sin. But there still is this thing where we can look at people and that are different from us and make a judgment. I mean, does that still happen? Yes. In fact, that's probably pretty normal. And we try to resist that or unlearn that, but it's a pretty regular way to act. So should a person who comes out of prison be king? Probably not. But haven't they paid for their indiscretion or sin or whatever? Yes. But we still don't like the idea of it. So could that be Joseph, who was thrown into prison by his brother? Very likely. And so remember, Joseph was a coat of many colors, and his brothers are jealous, the relationship he had with the father. So jealousy or envy causes a lot of terrible things. He's thrown into the pit. He goes out. He's in Egypt. He can interpret dreams. He helps the Pharaoh, the king, plan and lead. And so he's like the number 2 guy in all of Egypt. And this guy, who you would never expect to be anything at all, because he was thrown away, literally and figuratively thrown away, is now the head guy of the biggest empire that anybody knows about. You would never expect that to happen. That very well could be the case. Steve?
Would it be perhaps reading too much into it to think that that's also a preview of coming attractions?
Oh, well, I would say if you're talking about Jesus, okay, just checking. In Ecclesiastes, that's not in his mindset, but in Christian history, we would look at examples like this and say, see, Judaism expects a Messiah, an anointed one, a king, but our point has always been, we receive the Messiah, Jesus, just not the one they were looking for. But this is truly the Messiah. And so the king you wouldn't expect, that would be, you could use the term proof text, would be a negative view of that. A positive one would be, well, this is evidence that here's an example of what that might look like. That is definitely a Christian reading into the text. Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, the speaker, I don't think that would, because that doesn't fit his narrative.
So would you say it's not necessarily a valid reading of that verse?
I would say that is not a valid reading from a Jewish perspective. It is a valid reading from a Christian perspective. So it's sometimes two things can be true at the same time. But again, for a Jew, like just when Aaron Bisnow's in here, or probably a better example is when I've said this several times, but I'm about to be in a Purim spiel, which is the reading of the book of Esther. And this is the fun fact. Esther is the only book of the Bible that never mentions the word God, which is very weird if you think about it. But Esther is, bad people are going to kill all the Jews. Queen Esther saves them. It's kind of fun. And so Jews today, it becomes their kind of Halloween. They dress up in costume. You make fun of the bad oppressive empire that's trying to kill you. We won. And then as the Aaron Bisnow will say, haha, we won, let's eat. And there's a party afterwards. So in Purim, they read the whole book of Esther in English or Hebrew, and then they act it out in a very campy play. The Rabbi Myers of Tree of Life has written it. It's like his fun project to do every year. He's written it. 2017 was the Beatles. And you got to go, this is like a middle school level production value. Not Kappa middle school, just like regular old middle school production value. And people are wearing costumes, and you fit in the music to tell the story of Esther. Because you don't want to tell the same one every time, it's boring. After he came to Calvary, he used the Harry Potter series, because it looks like Harry Potter. It's been Star Wars this year, and I've just been cast. It'll be Star Trek, the original series. Because Alan Houseman, who comes here and is their president of the board, that's his favorite thing, is to have Star Trek Christmas ornaments. I'm going to be Dr. Spock. Mr. Spock. I will, thank you. I will, I ordered this morning the shirt, the ears, and the black straight hair wig. So I'm going for it. By the way, that is Ken Smith in the office, his favorite genre. So I got nice stuff so I can give it to him. Don't surprise him. Ken, don't listen to this. So we do that, and then we invited the Jews to be part of our Christmas pageant. So can it be true that somebody who does not believe Jesus is the Messiah can come and help us tell the story of Jesus as the Messiah? That's very, very weird. And I'm drawing an analogy to, can both those things be true at once? I think so. If you're comfortable enough with one another, Jew to Christian in this case, and your own beliefs, it doesn't bother me to read it this way and that way. And I think that's where that congregation is, Tree of Life with Calvary, because of our relationship. Now, would they go be in a Christmas pageant of anybody else? Probably not. But it's okay for them to celebrate Jesus as the Messiah, and they're not crossing their fingers, we really don't believe this. They have their beliefs, we have ours, but because of that relationship, you can honor the other person's view. That's extremely rare in the world today, I'll just point out. So we finished chapter 4.
You know, the Bible is supposed to be the book of faith and love and hope. What purpose is Ecclesiastes?
Oh, interesting question. The Bible, according to the scholar here, is supposed to be a book of, what did you say, faith, hope, and love? Faith, hope, and love. That is true, but remember, what does the word Bible mean? Books, like a book of books is a good translation. And how many books, separate books? Some of them are really small, like a couple paragraphs. Some of them are, like Genesis, fairly long, 50 chapters or so. How many books are there? 66, 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New. And they're not all the same thing. We talked about this in Genesis probably 4 or 5 times now in the last 10 years. There is a process called canonization, or if you've heard the Great Western Canon. The Great Western Canon of music is the music we've accepted and passed down, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, and so on, that these things we believe are the standard. Canon in this case means a measuring stick, and by which everything else is measured. So there might be a canon of music, or there is such a thing of the canon of Star Wars. This is official, this affects each other, and that's not official. That's just you can make it up. And there's a canon to lots of things. The canon of the Scripture, how I first encountered that term, was decided very early in the life of the church, and earlier for rabbis, well, actually about the same time, for rabbis, what books of the Bible do we want to include in the official, I should say, what books, writings do we want to include in the Bible, the official book? They had a discussion. They had a vote. Can you imagine how contentious it'd be? There are no executive orders by the king. There were in some cases, actually. There were no... There was lots of lobbying going on, and people would say, you know, this book is really terrible. Like Song of Songs. My beloved speaks to me and says, arise, my fair one, and come away. Do we want that X-rated stuff, or at least PG-13 stuff, in the Bible? Sorry, it says, this is scripture, your breasts are like twin gazelles. Oh my God, why did you put that in the Bible? That's much worse than Kohelet. Well, it depends on who you ask. Because it's not all about faith, hope, and love. All these things are for, we would say in the Episcopal Church, for establishing doctrine. They're believe in, they're all edifying, all reveal God. And so Song of Songs, for example, is erotic love poetry, which has always been understood as how God loves us and how we love God. It's a totally different thing than, say, Leviticus, which is basically a very boring set of rules. And you put those two things together and you're like, this is clearly the book of a committee. One thing to understand. But this, Song of Songs, and Ecclesiastes, and Job, and Genesis, and Proverbs, are all different ways of understanding a bigger picture that if you just had this, you would miss. Yes, the Bible is about faith, hope, and love. That would be more of a Christian idea, but I'd say it's universal. Try to understand who God is. What is our relationship vis-a-vis God? Who are we in the whole creation? And so if we just have Genesis, or why are there 4 Gospels? It's the same basic question. Because if you just had John, you would have no parables. You would have I am statements. I am the bread of life, I am the gate, and so on. But if you just had Matthew, you'd have no birth story of Jesus, like the Christmas story. If you just had Luke, you wouldn't have wise men. And so they had Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We want all 4, but we're not going to have, you've probably heard something called the Gospel of Thomas, and there are various other things. We don't want to include these, and these were not hidden books. They were not oh, this was the real gospel. That's just to sell you stuff now. These are the ones we think are consistently circulated throughout the tradition. These are the ones we think the community believes, and these are the ones, 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New, these are the ones by which we want to base our life on. So it definitely has faith, hope, and love, but it also reminds us in Ecclesiastes, life is really hard. And it also reminds us in Proverbs of some ways to live. And then there's these other things that are Psalms, for example. Why do we want to include those? That was the song, hymn book, if you will, of the people. So we have all of these to give us these different expressions to hold them together. Why they canonized it when they did is because if you just keep adding books forever, then you don't really have anything. It's, good fences make good neighbors, basic idea. You need some type of, this is it, and then other stuff can be in relation to that. That was a long answer, but not just faith, hope, and love. Because there's also oppression. There's also justice. There's also, life is completely unfair. And how do you explain that life seems to be amal, toil, most of the time, and it's not fair, and the good guy rarely wins, and then you just die? How do you account for that? That's why I think there are books like Ecclesiastes. Okay, it's 11 till. So we're just starting chapter 5. There are verses 1 through 7, as I said, are probably would have more included the last chapter. These are several aphorisms, pithy statements, observations about life. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's that type of stuff. I just feel like this guy heard this when he's with one of his concubines or one of his drinking buddies, or he's making a business deal, and he collected all of these and just put them together. And there's, some interesting truth to that. They all have to do, the first verses 1 through 7, about vanity, havalim, of speech. And we might say more than just speech, all forms of communication. So today, email, text, phone calls, web stuff, news, whatever form of media communication, all of it. And the first one, guard your steps, is literally watch your step when you go to the house of God. And that probably refers to the temple. We're asking earlier, who was this guy? Many scholars think of him by how he says it and what he says as an upper class guy who is very much focused on the establishment, because he's with the temple, which the regular people, they were around it, but there's this, I don't want to get in trouble with what I'm saying. There's an establishment in Washington, D.C., and there are those who want to be a part of it and those who don't want to be a part of it. This guy is part of the establishment and is interested in preserving it. And so what he says seems to come from much of that. So watch your step when you go to the temple in Jerusalem. Sincere listening, this is summarizing some of this, paying attention is much more pleasing to God than sacrificial gestures of fools. There's something I want to say, and we might get to it next time, about J.D. Vance's comments. There were speakers in the temple, and so teachers, preachers give it usually things like talking about the Torah or some interpretation of the law, and so listening to that is very, very important, rather than, hello, do you see, look how finely I'm dressed, I wear my Sunday best, I went to church, I gave a donation, look how terribly important I am, I sat in the front pew, I get the best seats everywhere I go. Don't be like that guy. What does God prefer? Someone who pays attention to how she lives, what she says, where her attention goes, how she spends her money, how she associates and treats other people, or somebody who pays lip service to religion and acts like a jerk? Or, here's my $100 I gave to the church, and then they remind you over and over, I'm a serious pledger at Calvary. If you make not much, the amount's not important. But if you make $1 million and give me 1,000, something's wrong with your spiritual life. If you make 30,000 and give 1,000, okay, good for you. But don't act like you're lording it over us to just use religious language without understanding it. And there I'll address as the very last thing. J.D. Vance, and I think what he says has some merit. For those of you, particularly on this side of the room, I mentioned this earlier. He said recently the phrase ordo amoris, which is ordered loves. And he was talking about in the context of immigration as a Catholic teaching. And that is the basic idea comes from Plato, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Then Aristotle, then adopted by St. Augustine in the mid-4th century, then later by Aquinas in the Middle Ages. And that thought is, so you pay closest attention to home, your immediate family, and then it goes out in concentric circles beyond that. There's some common sense to that, but that is not, it's not wrong, it's just not the center of Catholic social teaching at all. Certainly not since Vatican II in the mid-1960s. And so to say, this is obvious, just look it up, is, I would say, he's not wrong, but it's totally insufficient. So basic Catholic social teaching would say, first principle is human dignity. Every human has, dignity from God. Therefore, they're to be valued. Therefore, they're to be respected and looked after and so on. The second principle, and these are all interrelated, is solidarity. We are interdependent with and for one another. We look after one another. So if you have a factory that blows pollution and it comes over to our country, that's not good solidarity. The third principle would be subsidiarity, which is one of my favorite concepts. And in 10 seconds, it's you should exercise authority at the lowest level possible, closest to home, but the highest to achieve the highest effect. I'd say that perfectly well. So in a diocese, I'll say how that works. If you can do stuff in a congregation, do it in a congregation because that's where it's most efficient, it's the best. But things you need to do in a diocese, do at the diocesan level. So what do we do at the parish level, or think of it your family level? Well, at the parish level, we do Sunday school, we do preaching, we do teaching, we do pastoral care, social things, etc. But what about clergy health insurance? Well, that works much better. What about camp? Because everybody can't have their own camp, but we can share a camp. What about transitions, like helping congregation? Well, that works at a diocesan level. What about discipline? Yes. What about all rules? All that stuff works at a level up here that doesn't make sense down here. But if you can do it at the lowest level, do that. So care for one another at the lowest level. Applying these, so again, J.D. Vance, in my opinion, is not wrong. It's just missing those three ideas of human dignity, solidarity, and subsidiarity. So should you care, example most often given is Good Samaritan. Should you care for your neighbor? Yeah. But it's very likely your neighbor on the other side of the world you can't do anything about. But you can do something for the person right next to you. So better not to just, we should serve our neighbors, you're all terrible people, but you're letting the neighbor right next to you be in trouble in whatever way. So those ideas, again, not wrong, but he's missing, in my opinion, the essence of it, because it feels like they're not human beings if you push them away that way. Does that make sense? We'll actually get to chapter 5 next week now. Thank you all very much.